Well, our UK political correspondent Rob Watson has been reflecting on the impact Richard Sharp's appointment has had on the BBC.
It's not great for the BBC, and the way one colleague here put it to me is, the problem is, Rob, the colleague said, there's an awful lot of people kind of wandering around thinking, hang on a minute, so the BBC was headed by someone who was a Conservative or very supporters of the Conservative Party. Now, of course, everyone at the BBC would say that's profoundly unfair. The chairman of the BBC is not in an editorial role. He's not telling you or me, that person, what to run in their news. And I'm sure that Richard Sharp would say that, like the rest of us here at the BBC, once he got in the building, whatever his previous contacts, he also aimed at impartiality. But that's the sort of perception, this idea that, hang on a minute, why is the head of the BBC someone with close links? And the polling, I've looked at some polling that probably should give the BBC cause for some concern. It was done by YouGov at the start of the year, and it suggested that something like 44% of people kind of trust the BBC a lot, or certainly some, but some 50% don't. And that is a fall-off in trust in the BBC. But a bit of good news, Marianne, we are still more trusted than pretty much any other news organisation, certainly here in the UK.
And what about the government? We heard from Rishi Sunak earlier on today. What damage do you think this has done to the government and the way in which it chooses the chairman of the BBC and how that impacts on political impartiality?
Well, it could have been a whole lot more awkward, I think, for the government had Mr Sharp not wanted to go and somehow Downing Street, Rishi Sunak had to sort of fire him or push him, or awkward, of course, if it had to stand by Mr Sharp. But I think the view in Downing Street, the view of Mr Sunak will be, you know, this is an example, as perhaps they would put it, of more of the sort of mess left over by Boris Johnson, and that they can move on. But of course there is now the sort of challenge of, you know, who do they appoint next time round?
And the question of how they make appointments is now very much under discussion. Explain for the audience how the appointment is made and what people are calling for in terms of change to avoid something like this again.
Right, so members of the audience, look out, because there'll be an appointment, there'll be an advert sometime for the job. But essentially the way it's done is it will be publicly advertised. So if you fancy yourself as the next chairman of this extraordinary media organisation...
Go on, Rob, you can do it, you can do it.
Definitely not me. Look out. Then what happens is that ultimately you would be appointed by the government, by the Prime Minister, but other politicians, the person who's in charge of the Ministry of Media and Culture would also get involved too. So that is the way it works. And, you know, absolutely there have been people calling saying, hang on a minute, is it really a good idea that no matter how many safeguards you have, that the government of the day gets to make that appointment? I mean, the only thought I'd throw in there is that, you know, in the same way that all of us who come into work in this building every day are supposed to put on this sort of this mantle of impartiality, whatever your views are outside, you sort of come in, report, do your best. I mean, you could make the argument that that would apply to the chairman of the BBC, whatever that person's past contacts with British political parties, whatever their political views, that they too, when they come in, put on the old mantle and do their best. But there are some people who think, no, we need to look at the whole process again. This time round, it seems, we will be using the traditional process. So look out for the ad and then see what the Prime Minister thinks.
Look out for the ad, and there'll be someone new, I think, I think it's by June. We're expecting a successor to be announced.
Yes, although I think that might be an interim role. I mean, one thing I should explain for people watching around the world is that although the chairman is there to guarantee the BBC's independence, it is really important to stress that the sort of day-to-day stuff, the kind of stuff that you and I are doing and what goes into the bulletins, I mean, that is not decided by the chairman. If you're thinking of applying for the job, you're there to sort of oversee grand strategy and make sure that the BBC is delivering money and has a good plan for its future existence.
You're watching BBC News.